Cleopatra, last queen of Egypt. A kingdom once filled with glory now trembles on the edge of collapse. And at the center of it all stands one woman. A queen whose name would echo for more than 2,000 years. Her enemies called her dangerous. Her people called her divine. History remembers her as Cleopatra, the last pharaoh of Egypt. She was more than a temptress, more than a queen. She was a survivor in a world ruled by men, a ruler caught between the power of Egypt and the rising might of Rome. This is the story of her rise, her legendary alliances with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, and the tragic fall of Egypt's golden age. This is the story of Cleopatra, the last queen of Egypt. Chapter 1. Rise of a Queen. Cleopatra was born in 69 BCE into the Ptolemaic dynasty, a Greek royal family that had ruled Egypt for nearly 3 centuries. They were descendants of Ptolemy, one of Alexander the Great's generals. Though they ruled Egypt, most of the dynasty never bothered to learn the Egyptian language. They lived like foreigners in a land of pyramids and gods. But Cleopatra was different. From a young age, she studied languages, philosophy, mathematics, and politics. Ancient writers claimed she could speak as many as 9 languages, including Egyptian, the first of her dynasty to do so. To her people, this made her not just a foreign ruler, but a true pharaoh. When her father, Ptolemy XII, died in 51 BCE, Cleopatra, at only 18 years old, ascended the throne. But her rule was complicated. Tradition demanded that she share power with her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII, who was only 10 years old. Together, they were declared co-rulers of Egypt. At first, Cleopatra tried to rule in her own right. Coins from this period show her face alone, wearing the crown of Egypt, asserting herself as sole monarch. But this boldness sparked resentment among her brother's advisors. Whispers began in the royal court that Cleopatra was too ambitious, too powerful, and too dangerous. By 49 BCE, Cleopatra's enemies acted. Her brother's supporters forced her from Alexandria. She fled into exile in the deserts of Syria, stripped of her throne and power. But Cleopatra was not finished. From exile, she began gathering an army. She intended to march back into Egypt and claim what she believed was rightfully hers. At this same moment, a new power entered Egyptian politics. Rome, the most powerful empire in the world, had arrived on Egyptian shores. And with Rome came the man who would change Cleopatra's fate forever, Julius Caesar. Chapter 2. Julius Caesar and Cleopatra in 48 BCE, Rome's civil war spilled into Egypt. Julius Caesar, Rome's most powerful general, arrived in Alexandria in pursuit of his rival, Pompey. But when Caesar set foot on Egyptian soil, he found a kingdom divided. The young king, Ptolemy XIII, ruled in name, but was controlled by advisors. Cleopatra, the rightful queen, had been driven into exile. Egypt had become a prize for Rome's taking. Cleopatra saw her opportunity. If she could win Caesar's support, she could reclaim her throne. But how could she reach him? Caesar was guarded closely in Alexandria, surrounded by enemies and spies. That is when Cleopatra took one of the boldest risks in history. According to legend, she had herself smuggled into Caesar's chambers. Some say she was rolled inside a carpet. Others claim she was hidden inside a linen sack. Whichever the truth, when she emerged before Caesar, he was captivated. Cleopatra was unlike anyone Caesar had ever met. She was not only beautiful, but intelligent, charming, and politically brilliant. She spoke to him as an equal, not a subordinate. She offered more than her throne. She offered Egypt's wealth and loyalty. Caesar accepted her alliance, but this support came at a cost. War erupted in Alexandria as Caesar's forces clashed with Ptolemy's army. In the chaos, parts of the great library of Alexandria are said to have been destroyed in flames. Cleopatra emerged victorious. Ptolemy XIII drowned in the Nile while fleeing battle. And Cleopatra was restored as queen, now ruling with her younger brother Ptolemy XIV, but in truth, she ruled with Caesar. Soon, Cleopatra gave birth to a son, Ptolemy Caesar, known as Caesarion. She declared him the son of Julius Caesar, heir to both Egypt and Rome. In the years that followed, Cleopatra traveled to Rome. She lived in Caesar's villa across the Tiber River, appearing in public as a queen and goddess. Romans were fascinated by her luxury, but many were scandalized. A foreign queen had captured the heart of their most powerful leader. Then in 44 BCE, everything changed. Julius Caesar was assassinated on the Ides of March. The Roman Senate struck him down, and with his death, Cleopatra's position crumbled. Fearing for her life, she fled Rome and returned to Egypt with her young son. Once again, Cleopatra would have to fight to survive. And soon, she would find herself drawn into another alliance, one even more dangerous, one that would decide the fate of Egypt forever. Her new ally was Rome's rising star, Mark Antony. Chapter 3: Cleopatra and Mark Antony. After the assassination of Julius Caesar, Rome descended into chaos. His killers were hunted, and the empire was torn apart by rival factions. Out of this turmoil rose two men, Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir, and Mark Antony, Caesar's most trusted general. Together they formed a fragile alliance, but distrust lingered beneath the surface. Rome was unstable, and Egypt once again stood in the crossfire. For Cleopatra, survival depended on choosing the right ally. She watched carefully, weighing her options. Finally, she made her move. In 41 BCE, Mark Antony summoned Cleopatra to meet him in the city of Tarsus. He wanted answers. Why had Egypt not supported Rome after Caesar's death? Cleopatra saw this as more than a summons. It was an opportunity. She prepared an entrance that would never be forgotten. Sailing up the Cydnus River, she appeared on a golden barge, its sails drenched in purple, its oars of silver. The air was filled with the scent of incense and rose petals. Cleopatra reclined on a throne dressed as the goddess Isis, surrounded by musicians and attendants. When Antony saw her, he was overwhelmed. This was not a defeated queen pleading for mercy. This was a goddess, a monarch in full command of her power. From that moment, Antony was captivated. Their alliance was forged not only in politics, but also in passion. Antony followed Cleopatra to Alexandria, where he spent the winter at her side. They feasted, celebrated, and formed a bond that would shake the ancient world. But beneath the luxury was strategy. Cleopatra needed Antony to protect Egypt's throne and her son, Caesarion. Antony needed Egypt's wealth, grain, gold, and ships to fuel his ambitions. Together, they were not just lovers. They were partners in empire building. In the years that followed, Cleopatra bore Antony 3 children. They presented themselves in Alexandria as living gods, he as Dionysus, she as Isis. At the donations of Alexandria, Antony granted Cleopatra lands across the eastern Mediterranean, declaring Caesarion the rightful heir of Caesar. To the Egyptians, this was glory renewed. To the Romans, it was treason. Octavian, Antony's rival in Rome, seized on the scandal. He portrayed Cleopatra as a dangerous seductress who had bewitched Antony. Propaganda spread. Antony was no longer a loyal Roman, but a puppet of an Eastern queen. Rome's fear and anger grew. The stage was set for the final confrontation, Rome versus Egypt. Octavian against Antony and Cleopatra. The fate of an empire and Egypt's last hope for independence hung in the balance. Chapter 4: The Fall of Egypt. By 32 BCE, the rivalry between Octavian and Mark Antony had reached its breaking point. Octavian declared war, not on Antony directly, but on Cleopatra, Queen of Egypt. It was a brilliant stroke of propaganda. In Rome, Antony could still claim to be a loyal citizen. But by framing Cleopatra as the enemy, Octavian turned public opinion against them both. The decisive battle came in 31 BCE at Actium, on the western coast of Greece. Antony and Cleopatra commanded a massive fleet, hundreds of ships, thousands of soldiers. But Octavian's forces, led by his general Agrippa, were disciplined and well prepared. The fighting was fierce. Ships clashed, men burned, oars snapped in chaos. Then, at the height of the battle, Cleopatra made a sudden, fateful decision. Her fleet broke formation and retreated, sailing back toward Egypt. Historians still debate why. Was it a prearranged plan with Antony? Was she trying to preserve her navy? Or did panic overcome her? Whatever the reason, Antony could not bear to see her flee. Abandoning his men, he followed her ship, leaving his army leaderless. The result was disaster. Octavian's forces crushed what remained of Antony's fleet. The war was lost. Antony and Cleopatra returned to Alexandria, their power collapsing around them. Octavian marched relentlessly toward Egypt. By 30 BCE, his armies reached the gates of Alexandria. The city that had once dazzled the ancient world was now surrounded, its queen trapped within. Inside the palace, despair grew. Believing Cleopatra dead, Antony fell on his own sword. Mortally wounded, he was carried to Cleopatra's side, where he died in her arms. The man who had fought for Rome and for her was gone. Cleopatra was now alone. Octavian entered Alexandria in triumph, determined to bring her back to Rome as a prisoner, a living trophy for his victory parade. For Cleopatra, this humiliation was unthinkable. On August 12, 30 BCE, Cleopatra made her final choice. In her private chamber, she arranged her royal robes, seated herself on her throne, and took her life. The ancient writers say she used an asp, a venomous Egyptian snake, hidden in a basket of figs. Others believe she used poison. The exact truth remains a mystery. But what is certain is this: with Cleopatra's death, Egypt's independence ended. Her son Caesarion was killed shortly after, and Octavian, soon to be Augustus, Rome's first emperor, annexed Egypt as a Roman province. The age of the pharaohs was over. For more than 3,000 years, Egypt had stood as one of the greatest civilizations on earth. But with Cleopatra's fall, the golden age of Egypt came to its final end. Yet Cleopatra herself never faded into silence. Her story has been retold for centuries, in legend, in art, in plays, and films. To some, she is remembered as a seductress who toppled mighty men. To others, she is remembered as a brilliant ruler, a woman who dared to fight for her throne against the greatest empire in history. And though her kingdom fell, her name has never been forgotten. Cleopatra, last queen of Egypt. Chapter 5. Conclusion. Cleopatra's life was a story of brilliance, ambition, and tragedy. She was not merely a queen defined by her romances with Caesar and Antony. She was a strategist, a polyglot, a woman who mastered politics in a world dominated by men. She ruled not just with beauty, but with intellect and daring. Her death marked the end of Egypt as an independent power. But her legend outlived the empire she tried to protect. For 2,000 years, poets, historians, and artists have reimagined her, sometimes as a villain, sometimes as a heroine, always as a figure larger than life. Even today, her story continues to inspire. Was she a victim of Rome's propaganda, or a queen who knowingly played the game of empire and lost? Was she reckless, or was she simply fighting an impossible battle against the rising tide of Rome? What we do know is this: Cleopatra refused to be forgotten. Through her intelligence, her boldness, and her refusal to submit, she ensured her name would echo through history. The last pharaoh of Egypt is gone. But her story, her triumphs, her loves, her struggles, and her fall still fascinates the world, reminding us that even in defeat, some figures achieve immortality. Cleopatra, queen, mother, lover, goddess, legend. The last queen of Egypt. Cleopatra, the queen who defied Rome. If you enjoyed this journey into the life of Cleopatra, the last queen of Egypt, don't forget to give this video a like. It really helps the channel grow. Make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our next dive into the mysteries, rulers, and legends of ancient Egypt. And let us know in the comments, which part of Cleopatra's story fascinates you the most? Her rise to power, her alliances with Rome, or her dramatic final stand? Your thoughts keep the history alive. Until next time, thank you for watching.